On today's edition of the show, we are going to discuss the fallout of Game 3, and we are going to bring in the radio play-by-play voice of the Panthers, Doug Plagens, to discuss a series check-in for the Panthers being up 3-0 and what has been the difference for the Florida Panthers since being down 3-1 against the Boston Bruins to now being one win away from advancing to the Eastern Conference Final.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, May 8th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. You could also follow the show account on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here to enjoy your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, it's great even after 12 plus hours of the Florida Panthers going up 3-0. The vibes are still really great. The players are saying all the right things. The fans, especially online, the online community of the Panthers is just everyone's such in a positive mood. And especially after everything that has gone on this season, especially where this team was in mid-January to where they are now, and just one win away from advancing to the conference final. And just so I want to discuss more about like what the players are saying after going up 3-0. Of course, when recording post-game shows, just want to give you guys the raw emotion of whether it's a win or a loss, and discussing it more immediately versus how the players are responding. So this is a little bit of a time to give you guys an opportunity to share with you guys what the players are saying. And really, when it comes to how the players are locked in and what they do when they come to the rink and when there is a practice day versus game day. And Paul Maurice spoke mostly about how the routine from one day, when it's game time, and that, okay, this is what you have to go through on a certain game day and lock it in. Maurice was also asked about what has been the key to stopping Marner, Tavares, Nylander, and Matthews, and he said it's been one simple thing. Bobrovsky talked about how he doesn't touch goalies. It's all Robbie Tallis, and that Sergei Bobrovsky's routine hasn't changed from the day he comes, that from the first day that Maurice came here to now that he's the first guy in, last guy out, and the fact that he consistently just continues to be the ultimate professional. And Linda spoke about how the grind has made them a lot stronger. I mean, the grind has really happened since early January, and Bobrovsky hasn't really he didn't steal game 3 by any stretch of the imagination. You could argue that he scored both games 1 and 2, and a little bit shaky to start game 2, especially handling the puck and a little bit out of control in his net, but started to settle down as the game has gone on. And talking about how he wants to live moment by moment when it comes to each and every game, whether it's regular season or postseason. And Sam Reinhart spoke about how whenever you see the star players of the Toronto Maple Leafs coming into the ice, that when you see those certain players come on, that you want to get in front of their face. And also when talking about how when the team's on the road, the energy that they feed off on a home crowd, he says, when you love playing in front of the home fans, you feed off their energy. And Aaron Ekblad spoke about how when it comes to being responsible in your own zone. I mean, yes, we spoke a lot about how Aaron Ekblad has been great in finding players via stretch passes. Yes, Anthony Duclair on the game, on the first goal of the game on the power play, and then Sam Reinhart's eventual game winner in overtime, but also spoke about wanting to always do the right thing, and spoke about how where the team was to now, and he spoke about really not to dwell on the past and taking it day by day, and asked about really being the underdog and if there's any pressure, and then Aaron Ekblad speaking about really relishing the opportunity in front, and of course the continued day by day mentality. There's a certain theme here when it comes to listening to these players, and also Paul Maurice was asked about the story of Sasha Barkov's leadership and how great is it to have a Matthew Tkachuk. He said mostly there's a certain section of players who bring certain different things to the table. How Sasha Barkov is happy to have a certain player like Matthew Tkachuk. But here's also the thing that really stuck out to me about Paul Maurice and what he said to the media on Monday, and he spoke about how, yeah, he's the adult in the room, paraphrasing here, but he doesn't necessarily need to overexert himself when it comes to pregame speeches and all, and not having to fire the guys up, and that the players take control of the room, and that the not necessarily the role of the coach diminishes, but that the players can be accountable for themselves. And this is once again what happens when you bring in a coach of this experience in Paul Maurice, which you see that it's manifesting when it comes to these wins. And of course, like I said, the wins, enjoying the day, but then coming back when it's game day or recovery day, which really Monday was the recovery day, now which was the day after, of course, having a Tuesday practice tomorrow as well. And also was asked about Barkov and Ekblad about coming into sad media availabilities during their time. And yesterday when Aaron Ekblad was speaking to the media, he wasn't really super upbeat, and was asked about if it's weird territory for Aaron Ekblad. And Paul Maurice spoke mostly about how this is something that is spoken mostly in the locker room in between intermissions, and if you can't enjoy the moment, then those type of players don't belong here. But to believe Paul Maurice that the guys of Aaron Ekblad and Sasha Barkov are in fact enjoying the moment. So we can't make too much of what Aaron Ekblad puts out in public when it comes to speaking to the media after the game, and also spoke about how improved his play has been, and saying that the force is strong with him as well, referring to a media member who had a Star Wars shirt the other day, and say, hey, Paul Maurice is very aware that it was Star Wars Day the other day. So gotta give a little credit to Paul Maurice. We know he's a media darling and knows how to put a good laugh for the people in the media room as well. And then Brandon Montour asked about the players who and what happens when the players give up a goal and that everyone stays even keel. And Paul Maurice once again, when it comes to referring to the players and taking over the room, Brandon Montour talks about how the guys stay together and say everything's okay, and that when it comes to being the ace seed and knocking off the Boston Bruins and coming into the Toronto series and being up 3-0, he talks about that these guys mostly don't see it as that anymore, and that they're just playing hockey, and that they, of course, when you're stepping on the ice and playing the game, you're not thinking about your record. You're not thinking about how your penalty kill performed in the season. You're not thinking about how many penalties you even took in the middle, in the whole 82 game sample size of the Florida Panthers had throughout the season. And even going into Game 4, discussing, hey, it's still a 0-0 series, because listen, it's great that the Florida Panthers have got off to this great start in this series, but the players, the way they're seeing it is it's a 0-0 series. So of course, saying all the right things, but of course, putting that out together on the ice to finally get that fourth clinching win to advance to the Eastern Conference Final, it's not going to be an easy task by any stretch of the imagination for this run. And one last thing for the Panthers and Paul Maurice is that he's not overexerting himself. And I think that's really admirable when it comes to knowing when to talk to the players and knowing when to say something. And of course, all changed during the Toronto series, and that was when it feels that the players started to communicate better. And of course, when it comes to a team or even your relationships with your significant other or your friends, you got to learn how to communicate with each other on the bench, in the locker room, and then that manifests on the ice. And it feels that once again that was a big turning point in the Florida Panthers season, not just the result of getting that win in the regular season in Toronto that started the 6-game winning streak, but what happened after that, that the communication, that they were put on notice, and that the communication from there had in fact improved for the Florida Panthers. But in the second and third segment, we are going to be bringing in the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers, Doug Plagens, and we are going to discuss a series check-in for the Florida Panthers as they're up 3-0 over the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Indeed. And Indeed is a hiring platform that you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed has a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. We streamline hiring with powerful tools that you can find match candidates. Candidates you only invite are 3 times more likely to apply for your job than candidates who only see in the search, according to U.S. Indeed data. We get you one step closer to hiring immediately, matching you with quality candidates. Even better, Indeed's only job site where you only pay for applications to meet your must-have requirements. Indeed is unbelievable, powerful hiring platform, delivering 4 times more hires than all the other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 job credit at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And now joining us here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast for a round 2 series check-in edition of the show, he is the radio play-by-play voice of the Florida Panthers from 560 WQAM, Doug Plagens. Doug Plagens, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's always great to jump on the show, and we've got no shortage of things to talk about here.
Did you know that the Florida Panthers have not lost a hockey game since the last time you came on the show, by the way?
That you mentioned that to me when we were emailing, but yeah, I guess that's true, huh? They went on this run right after the last time I jumped on the show.
Yeah, and three wins to close out the series against Boston, and then now 3 in a row. This Florida Panthers team now up 3-0 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, 1 win away from advancing to their first Eastern Conference final since 1996. So, Doug, I want to first get into some of the players that have really improved their play along this playoff run, especially in these 3 games. I mean, let's talk about 3 players specifically. Reinhart and Ekblad, who struggled with an injury early on this season, was on LTIR for the first after Game 4, and then came back in mid-November. Sam Reinhart, who struggled to get on the score sheet until like Game 13 of the season. Really, the change for Sam Reinhart really came in a shootout goal, actually, not an actual goal, and then he started to explode from there. And then Anthony Duclair, his injury, coming back in Game 62, I believe it was, against the Buffalo Sabres, and then having especially the last 2 games, Anthony Duclair wreaking havoc, getting behind the Toronto Maple Leafs defense consistently, and even defensively closing in gaps and not creating any space for the opposition. What are your thoughts on those 3 players and how they've performed for the Florida Panthers to help this team get to this 3-0 lead that they are currently in?
Well, I guess before we dive into those individuals, I think some of what's maybe most impressive about this run the Panthers have been on now is they've won 6 straight, 3 against Boston to close out the first round series, 3 against the Leafs to start off the second round series. Is the fact that if you go down the list, if you go down the roster through the playoffs so far, 10 games played in the playoffs, you go down the list, every guy has had a big moment. Every guy has made an impact consistently every night. This has been a situation where the Panthers have been able to show the depth, the diversity in the offense. They've been able to have contributions from across the board, and that's what you want. You go down the roster, and everybody has had a big moment and made big impacts throughout the playoffs so far. And you're not going to succeed if you don't have everybody, and the Panthers have everybody rolling right now, so that's big. Anthony Duclair, the last guy you mentioned, picked up the goal in Game 3, and it was a breakaway, a great move. But the injury he had, as you know, it took time to recover from and get back from. And think about getting into a season trying to get your footing when everybody else has been playing, 3/4 of the season already. You're diving right in, and this, you're jumping on a freight train that's going full speed. So there's going to be an adjustment there. And he's been getting stronger and stronger every night. And we're seeing him make an impact in a big way. And as you said, it's not just getting on the score sheet, but it's little plays away from the puck. It's using his speed in every aspect of the game. And it was great to see him get that breakaway goal. It was a big one against the Leafs in Game 3. Sam Reinhart, his hockey IQ and what he's been able to do as an all situations guy, I'm not sure he gets the credit he deserves. And the line that's formed with him and Anton Lundell and Eetu Luostarinen, they've been able to be out there late in games, playing a shutdown role. They've been able to be out there in any situation. Sam Reinhart has been a face-off guy the Panthers have been able to lean on in stretches, and that's another luxury they have is, Paul Maurice has so many guys who have some experience playing that center position. They can take draws, especially against a Toronto team that when you have O'Reilly and Tavares and Matthews and David Kampf, they've got some guys who are really good in the circle. When the Panthers have guys they can throw in against them, that goes a long way. But Sam Reinhart, that was just a high hockey IQ play, the overtime winner in Game 3 to rim it around the boards. And that's where you saw, too, the chemistry that he and Anton Lundell have developed since going back to last season. And great to see them combine on that overtime winner. But Sam plays the penalty kill. He plays the power play. He's out there in every situation. He's dangerous in that bumper spot on the power play. So he does a little bit of everything for the Panthers. And maybe somewhat quietly, in 20 playoff games. Remember, he didn't play his first taste of the playoffs was last season with the Panthers, came up in the Buffalo organization, and the series against Washington last year was his first taste of the playoffs. In 20 playoff games, he's scored 8 goals. So he has shown the ability to be a guy that can put the puck in the net in the playoffs at a pretty consistent clip. So that's been big for him. And you mentioned Aaron Ekblad. You talk about all situations guys, and he's a guy that just seems to be getting stronger and stronger as the season's gone along. And you mentioned that chunk of time he missed early in the year. He worked his way back from that, and now he's playing a physical brand. He's chipping in everywhere. He's shutting down. You look at it as a team, the Panthers have done a great job against the big guns for both Boston and Toronto. Aaron Ekblad's been a big part of that, and he's playing some of his best hockey of the season at a very critical time. So you mentioned 3 guys there. They're all making impacts, but you go up and down the roster, everybody has had their big moments here in this playoff run. And that's part of what's made this so much fun.
Yeah, and just looking at the point production as well. If you're just looking at that alone, nobody's necessarily carrying one another. The top nine for the Florida Panthers specifically, especially, is you're not seeing as much. Of course, when you're on a 6-game winning streak, you don't have to do it as much, and you're seeing it more like on the other side. Of course, Toronto went 11 of 70 last night, so you see so many different combinations of forward lines and defense pairings as well. But Brady Tkachuk with 15 points, the next closest is Carter Hay. But then you see what's in the middle of it. You have 3 players tied with 7 points in Rhino, Benny, and Lundell. Barkov and Montour have 9. Verhaeghe has 9 as well. Monty leading the Panthers in 6 goals in 9 games. But nobody is having to put someone else on their back. And Tkachuk, he doesn't have a goal in this series so far, and yet the other guys contributing to the goal scoring and also to the forecheck as well. It's great to see that everyone is so bought in.
Yeah, you look at that Bennett, the Bennett, Tkachuk, Nick Cousins line and what they've been able to do, and the way they're playing. Even if things that aren't necessarily showing up on the score sheet are making an impact. The way those three guys are getting in on the forecheck is changing the way the Toronto Maple Leafs, well, they're having to find different ways, and it's just not working. That forecheck has really shut down what Toronto's trying to do. I know a lot of people are looking at the big guns on the Toronto side, and knock on wood, the Panthers have been able to keep that core four of Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander off the score sheet as far as goal production is concerned. A big reason for that, yeah, the Panthers done great against them individually. Matthews has had some chances. I thought Nylander's been noticeable, but getting in on the forecheck, and that's something where that line has really led the way. They've made it tough on the Toronto defense. They've turned pucks over more than we're used to seeing. They're not able to get those pucks up to the forwards as easily as they're used to. And that's affecting the way that those forwards are able to go about their business and produce. It's a big chain reaction. But you get the sense, especially with Tkachuk, Bennett, and Cousins, they're making the Leafs defense feel it every time they get in there. And you're going to get that every single night. And again, that's something that may not always show up on the score sheet. If you're just looking at a box score, you might not notice that, but it's impacting the entire game. And every time the next unit comes onto the ice, you're able to just pick up momentum off that. And the Panthers are one of the best forechecking teams in the league. They've shown it throughout the Boston series and in this Toronto series. And again, that you mentioned the Bennett, Tkachuk, Cousins line. They're right front and center for it.
We're going to take a quick pause from this conversation with our special guest, Doug Plagens, here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we need to tell you all about Built Bar. And are you looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever, Built. You got to try this. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And then come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. Not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they're healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait to get a box of Built Bar. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart, Sam's Club, while you can get your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick a 4-bar box of cookies and cream bars, full chocolate, or coconut puffs. Close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box of our hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro puffs. You can thank me later. Yeah, and when the players spoke to the media yesterday, they spoke all about having an eye for those top players for the Toronto Maple Leafs and wanting to also get in their face when it comes to when they are aware that they're on the ice as well, and taking away their time and space. And one other thing that I want to discuss is, of course, the transition that happened between last year's team to this year's team. Of course, high scoring offense that happened, and of course, even in the Boston series, in the very beginning of the series, even towards the middle, we saw a lot of goals. Even in Game 6, a 7-5 win for the Panthers, a high scoring game, and a lot of them in that series. But then you as starting to notice as the Panthers advance to the next round. Now it's going to that cliche in when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs that goals are harder to come by, and right at the forefront of it is Sergei Bobrovsky. What he's done at 5-on-5 specifically is just incredible. And I want to ask you, how great has this transition for the Florida Panthers to go from this run and gun style to scoring these lot of goals and of course giving a bunch, but also the fact that they were able to win these close games, and especially these last 2 games where they won when the opposition scores first?
Well, I think we've seen just a diversity in the attack. And you mentioned up until Game 2, all the Panthers' wins in the playoffs were when they had scored first. That was a trend that stayed consistent through the entirety of that Boston series. But now the Panthers have won 2 straight games when they gave up the first goal. Obviously, you don't want that to be the theme every night, but it's great to see that they're able to bounce back and not get fazed by the fact that the opponent came out and scored an early one. Sergei Bobrovsky's been absolutely massive. A stat that I have it written down right in front of me because I took it off NHL Network, but in the Toronto series alone, obviously 3-0, but goals against 1.97 and 938 save percentage for Sergei Bobrovsky in this 3-game series so far against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But for the overall of the offensive attack for the Panthers. You look back to Game 6 of the Boston series. That was a wacky one. That game was wild. You don't want to get into games like that every single night. But again, great for the Panthers to see they can dial it in and they can win a game like that if they absolutely have to. Now, the other thing you're seeing, and the Panthers have a great forecheck. When the forecheck's been rolling, that's when this team's been at its highest level all season long. But in the playoffs, those run and gun chances, those rush chances, the odd man rushes, the breakaways. I know Anthony Duclair scored off a breakaway during Game 3, but those breakaway and rush chances are going to be harder to come by than goals where you can manufacture it off the forecheck, like what they did on the overtime winner. Sam Reinhart got it in. Anton Lundell threw it back behind the net. Reinhart made the read, picked it up behind the goal, wraparound, game over. When you can manufacture like that and have success doing that, you're going to have much more overall success in the playoffs than when you have to rely on, getting a 2-on-1, getting a 3-on-2, getting a breakaway. Those chances just aren't going to be as plentiful. Now, as I said, if the Panthers get into a game like that, if they're in a situation like that, they certainly have the ability to capitalize. But when they're able to manufacture out the forecheck and make things really tough on the opposing defense, be physical on the opposing defense, that's when they're going to really get things rolling. And that's why during this series, there have been long stretches where the Panthers have had the puck in the offensive zone much more than Toronto has. Same thing going back into the Boston series. When you have the puck in the other team's zone, they're not scoring on you. They're not getting chances on you. And it's one of the best ways to play defense is to just keep the puck in the offensive end, work it around, and generate chances that way.
Yeah, and especially because in the last two games, we've seen Florida Panthers take a little bit of time to settle into the game, but of course it's a 60-minute game. Of course, the Florida Panthers really eliminated the Toronto Maple Leafs' ability to get those rush chances as the game has gone on, and of course getting the legs going, and of course the Panthers not showing any signs of nervousness as well in this series as well, especially as they came out of the gates in Game 3. Before I let you go, Doug, is there an unsung hero that you have in mind when it comes to the Florida Panthers' success throughout these first 3 games in the Toronto series?
It's tough to say unsung hero because everybody's had their moments and everybody's doing the job the way that we're used to seeing them do it. I think if I were to just throw a few names out there, because as you mentioned, Tkachuk's going to be front and center. He's leading the team in points. We all know what Barkov is capable of. He's out there in every situation. We see, Sam Reinhart's name getting on the score sheet. Sam Bennett, of course, he's out there. He's out there a lot. He's producing on that line. He and Tkachuk have played together most of the season. We saw when Sam Bennett came back for Game 2 of the Boston series, the immediate impact he made. And again, hats off to him because he missed the last dozen games of the regular season, missed the first game of the Boston series, and there was no sign of rust whatsoever. And he came right in, was playing that playoff Sam Bennett style, going back to the moniker he had, back to his time with the Calgary Flames. But I think just if we're naming a few guys, Eetu Luostarinen has been outstanding, and he's been one of those guys that's been able to play anywhere you need him. He can play center. He can take draws. He plays the wing. He's been playing the wing a lot. And along with Anton Lundell and Sam Reinhart, they have formed a really nice trio that's been able to handle all kinds of different responsibilities for the Panthers. Had that big goal in Game 6 of the Boston series. Eetu Luostarinen did. I know that stands out. That's one of the biggest goals that's been scored for the Panthers in the playoffs so far. Nick Cousins slid in on the Bennett Tkachuk line and has made an immediate impact. He scored the opening goal against Toronto in this series. So he's been able to come in and complement those guys really well. Again, you look at the success that Brandon Montour had during the regular season and into the playoffs. Who's been his partner the entire season, who's been just rock steady and consistent as ever, a veteran guy, Mark Stahl. And again, he's a defensive-minded, stay-at-home defenseman and isn't always going to have his name on the score sheet, but he's making an impact every night. And because of the way he plays, it allows Brandon to be able to maximize what he's able to do on the ice. So a few guys there who've made impacts in this series. I feel like across the hockey world, Gus Forsling is starting to get the credit that he deserves for the kind of player that he has grown into and become. for the Panthers. So that's certainly been great to seeing him get that kind of recognition. But again, that's just a few of the names. But of course, you have the usual suspects leading things as far as the point and goal production is concerned. So, Tkachuk and Barkov and Verhaeghe and those guys are always going to be there. But as I said, what's been really special about this run so far, and hopefully this run has a lot of runway still to go for it. But the Panthers have pushed the Maple Leafs to the brink of elimination. They got by the Boston Bruins in 7 games in round 1. And you go down the roster, and every single guy has had a moment where they've made an impact that has swung a game in the Panthers' favor. You look at the way Zach Dalpe stepped in for Ryan Lomberg after since he's been out with an injury, and he had a big goal in the Boston series. Zach Dalpe did. So you go right down the list, and they're just it's good story after good story, and we've seen impacts across the lineup, and that's what you need this time of the year.
Yeah, the pure definition of team effort for this Florida Panthers team, and it's definitely resulted in being up 3-0 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, Doug, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, and also programming note for Game 4 against the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Always appreciate that you give me a chance to throw out the housekeeping items, the programming notes. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Doug Plagens, DougPlagens. But for Game 4 coming up on Wednesday night, we will be on the air on the network across the Panthers radio network at 7 o'clock. We'll have exclusive local pregame coverage beginning at 6:30, and we'll be on AM 790 in Dade and Broward counties on Wednesday night. So that's for Wednesday. If you're tuned into the Palm Beaches, 92.1 Real Radio is, if you want to take the guesswork out of it, every Panthers playoff game is going to be on 92.1 FM in the Palm Beaches, Real Radio up there. 100.3 Thunder Country in the Florida Keys, always the place to listen. Sirius XM NHL Network Radio has had the games. If you're a Sirius XM subscriber and you have the app and the streaming platforms, Channel 932 always has the Panthers game, and it's always our broadcast. I know I just threw a lot at you. If you want to eliminate the guesswork entirely, we're always on the NHL app. You click that little headphone icon up in the top right corner, and then you select the Panthers feed. Again, it's always going to be our broadcast. So the NHL app takes all the guesswork out of it completely. That's everywhere. I'm sure there's a rewind feature on this that people can go back and get all that again if they need it. But again, the NHL app always has us. Go there right before puck drop, and it's got us, and you'll be locked in there. So all the different ways to tune in. I know there are a lot, but hey, consume Panthers hockey in mass quantities right now. It's good for you, and you can get it a lot of different places.
Yep, and I want to include, of course, the Odyssey app, which is
yes, the free Odyssey app. The free Odyssey app.
The free Odyssey app. The also partnered with the Locked On Podcast Network as well, where you can find Locked On Panthers as well. So, Doug, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the show, and I hope for you to join me if the Panthers make it to the next round, when the Panthers make it to the next round. So, hope to see you then.
Yes, let's book it, sir. We will talk to you soon.
That'll do it for this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I want to thank my guest, Doug Plagens, for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We will be back on Wednesday, where it'll be a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where Jacob Winans will be joining me to prepare for the Florida Panthers as they have yet another home game against the Toronto Maple Leafs in Game 4 for a chance to clinch their spot in the Eastern Conference Final. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Doug Plagens, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.